Hello, my name is Tim Warnock, and today is August 19, 2014. We're at the office of Vowell & Jennings at 214 2nd Avenue North, Suite 207, Nashville, Tennessee, 37201. Today I'm going to interview Ralph Gordon, and this interview is being conducted for the Legal History Project of the Tennessee Bar Foundation. Ralph, please state your full name and date of birth.
Sylvan Ralph Gordon, August 1, 1938.
Where were you born, Ralph?
I was born here in Nashville.
I'd like to focus on your family for a few minutes. Tell me about your paternal grandparents.
My paternal grandparents immigrated to the United States from Poland. My father became a tailor and later opened a store, men's store, where he made tailored suits. He later opened another store. Actually, it was not, he had given up the first store, opened another store on Chestnut Street, 4th and Chestnut. And he worked there, I suspect, about 10 years and had a heart attack. He then, after he recovered from that, he purchased low-income houses, refurbished them, and sold them.
Where in Nashville would the low-income properties have been that he was purchasing?
Mostly in North Nashville, South Nashville.
After your father's mother immigrated from Poland, did she learn to speak English?
Never learned to speak English. She lived with us until her death.
And tell me about your maternal grandparents.
My maternal grandparents also were immigrants, and they lived in Chicago. My grandfather was a carpenter, and my grandmother was a homemaker. After my grandfather died, she came to live with us on 21st Avenue North, and we had a full house. We had two grandmothers, my parents, two grown cousins that came back from the war, and me.
How was it having two grandmothers living with you?
Chaotic. That's the only way I can describe it.
But I'm betting that you were a very well-disciplined young man.
Oh, there was no question about that.
Did you have any brothers or sisters?
I was an only child for 11 years, and my sister came along, Alda Ray McAdams, who's obviously 11 years younger than me, and she married Bobby McAdams, whose father owned Hippodrome Oldsmobile.
You said you grew up on 21st Avenue North.
Correct.
Did your family sponsor refugee families after World War II?
Oh yes, that was later on. After World War II, my father brought probably 5 families from Europe, that some of whom had been in Auschwitz or some other camp, and he brought them here. He set them up in housing, and he got them jobs.
Sounds like a very generous man.
Well, he was. He really was a generous man.
Where did you go to elementary school?
Murphy School, which was on Arena Street, right around the corner from where we lived on 21st Avenue North.
Did you spend your whole childhood on 21st Avenue North, or did your family move at some point?
Well, actually, the first 5 years of elementary school, we lived on 21st, and then we moved to Whitland Avenue, and I went to Ransom School, and I went there in the 6th grade. Then in the 7th grade through the 12th grade, I went to West End High School.
What year did you graduate high school?
1956.
You were an athlete in high school, weren't you?
Yes, I was.
What were your sports?
I played varsity baseball from 9th grade through the 12th grade, and did have the pleasure of playing in Sulphur Dell while it still existed at that time.
And you know that the Nashville Sounds are building a new stadium at the site of the old Sulphur Dell Stadium. Do you plan to go?
I absolutely will go.
Have you remained a baseball fan throughout your life?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Do you have a team? I'm guessing Chicago.
I'm a Sounds team and a Yankee fan.
Okay. Now, were you an active Sound fan when they first came here in the 80s?
I was. I've been a Sounds fan all these low and many years.
Now we'll get to your entertainment career and the celebrities that you've represented over time. I understand that Conway Twitty was involved with the Sounds at one point.
Yes, he was. He was part owner at one point.
What position did you play when you played baseball?
I played shortstop and second base.
Okay. So after you graduated, before you graduated, did you work while you were in high school?
I did. I worked the whole time at Watts Pharmacy.
Where was that?
That was virtually at the corner of Harding Road and White Bridge Road. And I worked there during my whole time in high school.
Now, eventually there was a Moon drugstore.
Across the street, they were, so to speak, competitors.
And that's where Jimmy Kelly's was. So were you next door to Jimmy Kelly's?
No, Jimmy Kelly's was down the road a piece.
Okay. What did you do for Watts Pharmacy while you were working there in high school?
For those that might remember the term soda jerk, back then most drugstores had counters, and I fixed sundaes and malts and milkshakes, and actually swept the floor when it needed to be swept. And one interesting thing back then, there were no ice machines, and you had to shred the ice for the fountain every day.
Oh, wow.
And by the time I finished high school, I had arms like you wouldn't believe.
So that probably helped you in your baseball career.
It did, I think.
Other than playing baseball, did you play any other sports?
I played a little football, played a lot of basketball in church leagues and various baseball teams around town in church leagues, that type of thing.
Other than the sports, did you have other interests while you were in high school other than studying and working?
I read a lot, went to movies, enjoyed dating.
Do you have a favorite movie?
Tin Cup with Kevin Costner.
Now, you play golf, don't you?
I certainly do.
That's his movie about trying to make it as a golf professional.
Yes.
I recall that you had several guys who you identified as your buddies while you were in high school: Godwin Harrison, Steve Nickel, Buddy Yoakley, Don Gentry, Tommy McAdams, Don Korn, Buddy Francis, Bob Morrison, Wendell Stevens, Philip Suter, Wyatt Allen, Fred Couch, and Jerry Averbush.
Exactly, all of those, and we intermingled quite a bit, and they were fun guys. They played sports, and we had a very good rapport during that period of time.
Have you been able to keep up with any of them as your career progressed?
Well, Jerry Averbush and Godwin Harrison, Steve Nickel, Tommy McAdams, Don Korn, who recently died, Buddy Francis, whose parents owned an advertising agency, and I think he inherited that. Jerry Averbush became a dentist and moved to Huntsville, Alabama. That's about as far back as I can go.
Okay. After you finished high school, what did you do?
Well, there was a question of where I was going to go to college or if I was going to go to college. I made application to several colleges, but settled on the University of Tennessee for two reasons. One, it was the closest to Nashville, and two, money was an object back then.
What interests did you have when you were at UT?
Well, I had several. I was president of my fraternity, ZBT. I was elected president of the Interfraternity Council. I was elected to the Omicron Delta Kappa Honor Society.
That's an academic honor society, right?
It is.
So you must have been a good student.
Well, I was studious, let me put it that way. Scarabean, which was also an honor, it was a secret honor society, much like Skull and Bones from Yale. And was lucky enough to be elected to who's who in American colleges and universities.
That's quite a collegiate resume. Did you find time for fun while you were in college?
The fun was raising extra money by selling socks from hosiery mills, which were close to Knoxville. And I picked up and delivered laundry to the various fraternity houses. That was about much of the work. Oh, I did work in a men's store for a period of time.
Where was the men's store?
It was near the university. I think it was, I don't remember the name of the road, but it was on the main road. It was not far from our fraternity house, which was on 17th.
So Cumberland Avenue runs...
Cumberland Avenue, there you go.
It becomes Kingston Pike at some point.
Correct. It still was Cumberland Avenue where the store was.
Were you a football fan?
Absolutely a football fan. My blood runs orange in the fall.
How did the teams do when you were in school?
Oh, they were beautiful. They won a couple national championships. But I became friendly with several of the players back then, Johnny Majors, Bill, having trouble with names.
Well, Johnny Majors is certainly an impressive...
Landon Doherty was one, and Bill, I can't remember his last name, but I would tell you that he was the banker in Sparta, Tennessee.
Did you have teachers in high school or college who were particularly influential?
Yes, I had an English teacher with whom I credit the ability to write briefs and do whatever work is necessary in a law practice. Her name was Anna Dembski, and she was a tough old bird. She slapped me around a pretty good bit, but she got the work done.
Did you have other influential teachers?
In high school?
Or college?
Well, in college, I had two that stand out in my mind. One was Edmund Morgan, and he wrote the Military Code of Justice, and he also taught at Yale University before coming to Vanderbilt. And the other gentleman was Paul Hartman, and he was the teacher of contracts. And every time I look at a contract, I think back to things that he told me, and he put together a combination of things, and he would say, ergo contract. So yes, he was very influential.
And both of those influential teachers were from your law school career?
Yes.
How did your interest in the law begin?
Well, I knew no lawyers, but my father had a lawyer by the name of Lewis Leftwich. Now, Mr. Leftwich was a partner in the firm of Denny Leftwich and Lackey, which became later Denny Leftwich and Chernow. And I think it came about by my father kind of inquiring of him what his son should do after he graduates college. And Mr. Leftwich suggested that he go to law school, which was imparted to me, and I thought that was a good idea, and he thought it was a good idea. And I did have a conversation or two with Mr. Leftwich. One stuck in my mind because, jesting or not, he said if I graduated law school, I would have a place in his firm. Unfortunately, he died during my first year of law school.
Ralph, did you serve in the military?
I did not.
So you decided to go to law school after talking with Mr. Leftwich and after talking with your parents. Did you enjoy your law school career?
The best part of my law school career was graduation.
Did you make some good friends while you were in law school?
I did. Lou Connor, a gentleman by the name of Bear Dog Crutchfield from Chattanooga. Numerous others.
Did you go to school with Hayes Cooney?
With Hayes Cooney, I did.
Bill Lassiter?
Yes.
Tom Peebles?
Yes, Tom was, I think, from Columbia, Murray County, Tennessee. And those that haven't passed away are still friends of mine.
When you look back, what's your assessment of the value of the law school curriculum?
Well, it taught me discipline and focus.
And did those stay with you throughout your legal career?
They had to, or I would not have succeeded.
Now, did you remember studying for the bar examination?
I do indeed.
Tell us about that.
Lou Connor put together 5, 6, 7 of us, and we would meet at his home on Beacon Drive, and he would pound the law into our heads. And to give you an idea about Lou, which would not surprise you, Lou decided one afternoon he wanted to play golf while he was tutoring us. So we all jumped in golf carts and ran next to his golf cart, and he played golf. And then we came back and went about our business.
Well, you obviously passed the bar exam.
I was very lucky. I passed it the first time.
Now, are you married?
I am.
How did you meet your wife?
I met my wife on a blind date. We got married after I finished, it was before I started law school, actually, and we've been married for 53 years, have 2 boys.
Your wife's name is Phyllis, right?
My wife's name is Phyllis.
Tell us about your 2 boys.
One was Gary Russell Gordon, and he and I owned a couple of movie theaters together. And he became enthralled with the fact that they did not have a software program to meet what he thought were his needs in the movie theater. So during the time that the movie theater was in existence, which was 13 years, he developed software for movie theaters and for concessions movie theaters. And he's been very successful at it. As a matter of fact, his company, Sensible Cinema Software, is now an international company, and his software is used in over 4,000 screens across the country.
Across the world, it sounds like.
Well, actually in 4 other countries as well.
And in addition to Rusty, you had another son?
Yes, Brad is an attorney, and he and his wife and 3 children, his wife's name is Becky, and the 3 children, 2 boys, Jack, Sam, and a daughter, Charlotte. And Brad is the Vice President and General Counsel of the Gilbane Company in Providence, Rhode Island. The Gilbane Company builds very large-scale public buildings, airports, that type of construction company. They're international, and they have 50 offices, and he is over all of the offices.
Do you know whether you were an influence in Brad's deciding to become a lawyer?
I think definitely I was.
Is that a profession that you recommended to him?
Yes, I certainly did.
So you had a conversation with him, much like Mr. Leftwich had with you.
I did. The only thing that was different is I didn't have a law firm for him to go to.
Let's take you back to your law school career. Did you work while you were in law school?
I did. I started law school in September of 1960, and actually the day before I started law school, I went to work for a lawyer by the name of Morris Levine. And I was a general flunky, had no title, and we never discussed payment of any salary or anything. I came to find out during my first year I was making $50 a month, which was fine, because I was working part-time. Gave me an opportunity to meet all the clerks and judges in the courthouse. And I also had the opportunity, thanks to Morris, to ride to work with he and Carol Kilgore, who was a partner with Cecil Brandstetter, and Chancellor Ned Lentz. And that was an exciting time. I learned more from these gentlemen about the practice of law and being a lawyer than I learned in law school.
So you carpooled with the chancellor and a couple of other lawyers into
Carol,
downtown Nashville?
Yes, Carol Kilgore.
Now, did you work with John Cheadle when you worked for Mr. Levine?
I did. John Cheadle was in the office. Dutch Ullian, who later became judge of the Second Circuit Court. Monk Edwards, who has passed away. And Robert Murphy, who became a General Sessions Court judge, and he has passed away.
Do you remember your first day on the job working for Mr. Levine?
Oh, I do. I do. I was nervous as a cat. I mean, it was, I had no idea what I was going to do and how I was going to do it. And didn't get a lot of instruction from Morris. He handed me, a half dozen or so files, and he said, look in each of the files and you'll find the name of a person who owes doctors or hospitals. Call them on the phone, collect the money. And that's what I virtually did.
And you did that during your entire law school career?
Pretty much.
So you would have been in law school from 1960 until about 1963 or 4?
63.
When you were in law school, were lawyers recognized as associates or partners?
I would say mostly as associates rather than partners. During that time, you really had to be with a firm for quite a while before becoming a partner.
Was it hard to find a job in a law firm in the early 1960s?
When I came out of law school, I couldn't find a job. Morris was my only source at that point in time. The larger firms, if weren't hiring unless you were a son-in-law, brother-in-law, some relation. And as a result, I set up a solo practice starting in Morris's office.
What were the larger firms in Nashville when you started practicing law?
Bass, Berry, and Sims, Cornelius and Collins,
Was Dearborn and Ewing?
Dearborn and Ewing was one of the larger law firms, but it went out of business, and lawyers scattered, so to speak.
You mentioned Carol Kilgore. What became of Carol Kilgore?
Carol Kilgore went to work for Cecil Brandstetter and stayed with Cecil Brandstetter until his death, both Cecil's and his death. He was an outstanding lawyer, but he was more of a writer than anything else. But he was a high-profile lawyer and a gentleman, and had a great deal of knowledge to transfer to young lawyers.
Did you have an opportunity to appear before Chancellor Lentz?
I certainly did.
Tell us about that.
There was a junkyard here in Nashville, and owned by an elderly gentleman who passed away. And Judge Lentz appointed me to represent the estate. The result was I made my first large fee. Enjoyed doing it and appreciated the opportunity to do it.
Did you form an association when you graduated law school?
Well, it was in 1964, March of 1964, as I recall, with John Cheadle and Robert Murphy.
Where did you have your office?
We started in the Stallman building, Murphy, Cheadle, and Gordon, and stayed there for several years.
Was the Stallman building home to other lawyers and law firms?
Yes, absolutely. That was a place that lawyers went at that time for reasonable office rates. We moved from the Baxter building to the Stallman building. When I say we, Morris Levine and the group that was with him at the time, we moved to the Stallman building. And when it came time to form the association with John Cheadle and Bob Murphy, we stayed there for a period of time.
Were Murphy and Cheadle classmates of yours?
No, neither one of them. Both of them were older. John was a football player for Vanderbilt, big boy. And Bob Murphy was a scholar. He loved to write, he loved to read, and I can't tell you how many books he would read in a week. But
what type of legal work did you do when you first started your association with Mr. Murphy and Mr. Cheadle?
Mostly corporate and real estate, and the clients came mostly from other lawyers who were either too busy to handle a particular case or just didn't want to take that kind of case.
So you learned about the importance of referral work.
Absolutely.
And were those lessons that you carried with you throughout your career?
Absolutely.
Was Murphy appointed to the bench by Governor Dunn?
He was.
When was that?
I want to say 1967 or 68.
Did you have an opportunity to appear before then Judge Murphy?
Well, aside from the fact that it was a conflict of interest, I did. But I called it to his attention on a couple of occasions, and he said, "Oh, don't worry about it." And we went on with the case.
Tell us about the practice of law generally in Nashville in the late 1960s.
Well, Nashville obviously was a smaller town, smaller city, had fewer lawyers. The lawyers were more civil to one another, and you could trust another lawyer. For instance, if I had a case in circuit or general sessions court and I needed to continue the case, I would call up the other lawyer and say, would you mind if we continue this case to so-and-so? And 99% of the time he would say, certainly. We didn't write up any motions or orders. When time came, I went to court, or he went to court, told the judge, and it got continued. That doesn't exist today. Everything has to be in writing.
Did you represent Woodlawn Cemetery at one time?
I did.
Tell us about that.
That was an interesting case with Tom Martin. Tom's clients alleged that their loved ones were buried in the wrong part of the cemetery. And we went virtually through the whole case till I was given a plat of the cemetery by my clients. And it showed on there that these people were buried where they should have been buried. And I took that to Tommy, and he was most appreciative, and he was glad he was not embarrassed by the fact that there was a plat showing the correct place of burial. From that time till today, Tommy and I have been the best of friends, and we were associated in the practice of law until my retirement.
Tell us about your daily routine when you first started practicing law.
I would get to the office 8 or 8:30, and I would work during the morning. I would have lunch with other lawyers or clients, and would work in the afternoon till about 6 or 6:30, and take home work to either read through or draft. Basically, that was my day.
So it sounds like you were a hard-working, diligent lawyer.
I don't want to brag too much on myself, but yes, I was pretty conscientious and didn't mind the work.
Now, were you paid a salary when you first got out of law school?
Oh, no. I was never, ever paid a salary by anybody. All the monies that I earned came from fees from clients.
The Nashville landscape has changed quite a bit between 1964 and the present. You mentioned that you had an office in the Stallman building. Were you ever in Parkway Towers?
Yes, I was in Parkway Towers for about, I guess, 8, 9, or 10 years.
Do you remember who other lawyers who were there when you were there?
Tommy Martin and I can't remember if we had anybody with us or not, but we stayed in Parkway Towers until they raised our rent. As a matter of fact, we were the first tenants of Parkway Towers. And there's an interesting tale I've got to tell you about the Parkway Towers.
Please do.
Being the first tenants, we were on the first floor. And we also had access to the bathrooms on that floor. And the toilet paper was rougher than a sandpaper. So I wrote a letter to Mr. Henry Sender, who is the builder of the building. He and Morris Craft managed the building. And I wrote the letter, and Morris called me down to Henry's office, and the whole group of their office was in the office, and they had maybe 10 to 15 rolls of toilet paper. to give me a choice as to what kind of toilet paper I wanted.
So you changed the landscape, so to speak, of Parkway Towers.
So to speak.
So you were in the Stallman Building, you were in Parkway Towers. Were you ever in the Trial Lawyers Building?
Yes, I was. Tommy and I, at some point in time, decided the rent was too high and we could get a better deal from the Trial Lawyers Building. So we moved over there, and we were there for several years. There were other lawyers in the building at the same time.
Do you recall who they were?
The names, I can't really recall their names.
The one thing, or one characteristic that those buildings seem to share is they were all near the courthouse.
Absolutely. Courthouse was virtually across the street, and you just walked over there. And at some point in time, Tommy and I were invited to join Jim Harris and Rusty Jones in their entertainment practice. And at that time, they were in a house on 18th. And we stayed there for, I guess, maybe a year or two and moved into the penthouse of the Fieside Building. And that group is still together, still in the penthouse at the Fieside Building, including Tommy.
But you've retired.
I retired.
And it's 2014 currently. When did you retire?
I believe it was in February 2004.
Looking back from 1964 to February of 2004, who do you attribute to being some of the bigger influences on your career as a lawyer?
Obviously Morris Levine, Chancellor Lynch, and I'd say Lou Connor.
How did the market change in the middle 70s?
In 1974, the real estate market took a dive. And as a result, I was not getting corporate work or real estate work and basically sitting at my desk twiddling my thumbs. And I got a call from a client of mine, Shug Baggett. That was his name, Shug, S-H-U-G, Baggett, who owned a club in Printer's Alley, a nightclub.
What was that nightclub called?
George Jones Possum Holler.
And
in our conversation, he asked me if I would be interested in representing a country music artist, that artist being George Jones.
At the time, were you doing Mr. Baggett's real estate work?
At that time, I was doing some negotiations for him. Not necessarily real estate, but a lot of things.
And how did you respond when Mr. Baggett asked you if you'd be interested in representing a country music artist?
I told him I would be very interested in doing that.
And who was that artist?
The artist was George Jones. And I represented him for some 5 years.
Is that how you got into entertainment law?
True.
What's involved in representing artists and musicians and comedians and clients who you've represented over the years?
Well, there are various types of contracts. Most of them are pretty similar. Music publishing contracts, songwriter contracts, producer contracts. Each one has its own set of rules, so to speak, most of which are not written down.
Who else was practicing entertainment law in Nashville in the middle 70s?
Mike Milam, I think Derek Crownover at the time, you.
Eventually. Yeah, Mike Milam, I guess, and...
he had a partner.
Was that Dick Frank?
Dick Frank, yes.
So really it was the three of you in the middle 70s.
At that time, yes. We They were not on Music Row, so our group was the first law firm on Music Row.
And who was in that group? It was you and Tommy Martin.
Rusty Jones and Jim Harris.
Did you, how did you come to be on Music Row? Was that coincidental or deliberate?
No, that was deliberate.
When you were representing George Jones, I know he had a number of different record deals. Did you negotiate the United Artists contract?
I did, and a couple of his CBS contracts. And
He developed a little bit of a reputation.
he was known as No-Show Jones. He had missed in 1 year in excess of 200 concert dates.
Did that affect how you did your job as a lawyer?
Actually, yes.
Tell us about that.
Mostly it was trying to get him out of being sued, or if he was sued, how was he going to pay any judgment that was rendered against him? So what I would do is I would talk to the venue, the guy who set up the concert, and he knew well that Jones had missed a lot of dates. He knew well that Jones didn't have a lot of money. But what we would try to do is to set another date for George to play a concert at that venue. And for that, he would either get half the fee he would ordinarily charge plus minimum expenses. And that's how basically we dealt with most of the artists that we represented.
Did you represent Jerry Lee Lewis at any point?
I did.
How did you come to represent Jerry Lee Lewis?
Jones and Shug Baggett invited me to meet Jerry Lee Lewis on the second floor of the Possum Holler. And I lasted probably 3 years with Jerry Lee. He was probably the most difficult client to represent, but he was always in trouble, and the money was very, very good.
George Jones and Tammy Wynette were married to one another for a period of time.
They were for a while, and they got a divorce.
Did you continue to represent Jones?
I did, and Jones decided that he wanted the same contract that he thought Tammy had with CBS. So he instructed me to go to New York and deal with the vice president of CBS Records to get him a new contract which matched Tammy's. And the label said, no, we're not going to do that. His answer was, George's answer was, well, I'll never go back in the studio, which was a very foolish thing to say when you're making your living off of your records. But he did get a large advance from CBS, and he was a happy camper.
And he did go back in the studio, right?
Oh, yes.
And did he record anything memorable?
He recorded probably one of the classics, He Stopped Loving Her Today. Beautiful song, and his estate, I'm sure, is still getting royalties off that song.
Did you ever represent Lee Greenwood?
Yes, I did. I think it was about 1980 I met Lee, and from 1980 until I retired, I represented Lee in all of his entertainment work and a lot of his personal work.
Did you represent, or do you represent a comedian named Rodney Carrington?
Oh, absolutely.
Tell us about
Rodney is my one client today in retirement. When I met Rodney, Rodney was managed by a South Carolina manager who had drafted a contract, and Rodney was referred to me for the purpose of getting him out of that contract. Well, I read the contract, and it was a California contract. And I asked one question of Rodney: has this man also booked your dates? And he said, well, yes, that's how I get my dates. Well, the law in California says if you're a manager, you've got to be a manager. And if you're going to book dates, you're a booker. And as you can appreciate, it was not very difficult to get him out of that contract. The first time I saw Rodney Carrington was during that period of time. He was playing at Zany's, and his entire take for that night, I think, was $50. And he was also selling T-shirts out of the trunk of his car. That was where he was making the most of his monies at that time. Now today, Rodney flies to all of his venues in a private jet. He probably, and I'm going to approximate the figure, I do know the figure, is over $3 million a year.
Was it rewarding for you to watch these artists grow and be a part of their team?
Yes, it was. It was rewarding in several ways, one of which was I was then accepted as a part of the entertainment community, not just here in Nashville, but in New York, California, Texas, and that was beside the money, was very rewarding.
Well, you've certainly made your mark in the field of entertainment law.
I think I have. I hope I have, in the right way.
Did you represent Merle Haggard?
I did. That was an interesting situation as well. Merle was sued for copyright infringement by Harlan Howard, who was a very well-known songwriter. And in the course of that representation, I was going to Redding, California, to prep Merle for his deposition. We sat down in his living room, I recall it like it was yesterday, and we talked for about 30, 40 minutes. And he said, would you please excuse me? And I said, certainly. Well, he didn't come back for 3 days. I didn't mind so much because I was on the clock. You know, he was on his boat on Lake Shasta, didn't want to give his deposition, and we worked around it by promising Harlan Howard that we would put 2 of his songs on Merle's next album, which we did and settled the case.
So it was a positive result for everybody.
Exactly.
Did you represent Johnny Paycheck?
Yes, I did. I represented him, I guess, for about 3 or 4 years before he went to prison.
Did you meet Aubrey Mayhew?
I did meet Aubrey Mayhew. He sat in my office and tried to talk me out of a suit that I was counsel for, and he was a different breed of cat.
He's a colorful character.
He was a very colorful character, and I believe he had purchased the windowsill or the window of the Texas Depository building,
Texas school book
school
depository?
building, from which Oswald shot the President of the United States.
Or so he claimed. Or
So
so
he-
Mayhew claimed.
So he claimed.
So you've represented a lot of colorful people,
Very much so.
and you've been present at some sad moments in country music.
Yes. My favorite client was Tammy Wynette, and I represented Tammy for about 25 years. And one night, I get a call from Tammy's sister-in-law. You need to come over here right now. I said, what's the rush? What? He said, Tammy's dead. Well, that just shook me to the core. So they didn't live far from my house, so I was over there within about 10 or 15 minutes. And at the time, she was married to George Ritchie, and he was a basket case. And I asked Sylvia Ritchie, the sister-in-law, if anybody had called 911 to report the death, and was advised that no one had called. So I did call 911, and it went from there.
George Jones, Lee Greenwood, Jerry Lee Lewis, Merle Haggard, Johnny Paycheck, Tammy Wynette. Those are quite an assortment of names from the 60s and 70s and beyond. Did you continue to represent country music entertainers as the industry changed and modernized?
I did. And music publishers, music producers, a pretty good variety in the entertainment industry.
Did you start to see an increase in people selling counterfeit merchandise?
Absolutely.
How were you involved in trying to shut down that behavior?
Rusty Jones represented Garth Brooks. And Garth was the victim of a lot of counterfeit merchandise being sold. So Rusty asked me if I would try to file a suit to get a restraining order to keep the merchandise from being sold at the venues, which I did. And I got a restraining order. And it was a restraining order that each of Garth's people had in their possession, that they could go up to whom they thought was a counterfeit seller, serve the restraining order on them, and seize the goods. And that's what they did.
And what disposition was made of the goods after they were seized?
The goods were kept for about a year and a half. No one laid claim to them, so they were destroyed.
Was that some of the first name and likeness protection litigation?
Yes.
And have you done that for other artists as well?
I did it for Tim McGraw, yes, with the same result.
Now, you've appeared, I would imagine, in courts all throughout the state as well as the country.
Correct.
Do you have any memorable stories from any of the chancery courts or circuit courts here in Nashville?
Yes, particularly with regard to a song which was claimed to have been pitched, as they say, introduced to Blake Shelton.
Now, Blake Shelton's a country music entertainer.
That's correct.
And when you say pitched, just somebody trying to
get him to record it.
Okay.
So the issue, pardon?
How did that turn out?
It turned out well for me. I took Blake's deposition, and Blake was very cordial, very cooperative, and said that my client was the one that pitched it to him. And as a result of that, the good Chancellor Lyle ruled in my favor. So yes, that was a memorable trial.
You've represented other artists, Charlie Pride.
Yes, some frequently, some only once.
In a number of genres, you've represented Dan Seals of England Dan and John Ford Cole.
I did Dan Seals' first CBS contract, and Dan was a part of
England Dan and John Ford
England Dan and John Ford Coley. I also represented Jim Seals, who was
So you're
Seals
still-
and Croft.
So you've crossed over into genres other than country.
Oh yeah,
Did you represent any athletes?
I have. I represented a pro football player by the name of Reggie White.
Now, he came out of Tennessee?
He came out of the University of Tennessee and was a Hall of Famer. Really a fine gentleman. And I did some contract negotiations for him. And before he sent me an autographed copy of his book that he had just finished writing, which I have today.
Did you represent any record executives?
Yes, I did. I represented Joe Galante. I think I drafted a will for Joe. I can't recall anything else that I did for Joe.
I know you to be a person who kept in front of law office technology. Was that deliberate?
Very deliberate. And it was also fun because we started with electric typewriters and we graduated to the first computer, which was known as a K-Pro, K-A-Y-P-R-O. And it was about this long and about that wide, and had a screen about that big. And you would have to write your own programs for it. And there were books on the market that you would get for, say, an accounting program or a writing program. And Microsoft then came out with the personal computer. Well, it hadn't been out 2 days when I had to have one. So we went through a series of personal computers, and when I retired, I took 3 of them home with me. I probably got one of the most technological home offices that you've ever seen. 3 printers, scanners, 3 computers, you name it, I've got it.
So you've seen communication in the legal profession progress through phone to hand delivery to fax machines.
Correct.
To internet. How has the improvement in technology affected the practice of law in your opinion?
Well, in the entertainment business, so much of the wording of the contracts are so similar that you could just cut and paste. You could take words from one contract and put them into another contract, and they would be the same wording. So it made life a lot easier rather than have to go through your files and figure out what it was that you wanted to put in this contract that you had done previously.
We focused a lot on your entertainment law practice. Did you do any work in government?
Yes, I did. Initially, I was elected the chairman of the 5th Congressional District Republican Party. And I did that for, I think, a year.
In 1964?
I think 1964.
So you were a young lawyer.
Yes. And very much involved in politics.
Did you interact with Howard Baker at all?
Yes. As a matter of fact, I knew Howard Baker and Winfield Dunn, Bill Brock.
Was Bill Brock a representative from East Tennessee?
No, from Memphis.
From Memphis.
He was a dentist and became involved in politics and became a senator. Beautiful guy, really was.
Did you ever work as a lobbyist?
I did. I worked for the Tennessee Consumer Credit Association and the Tennessee Collectors Association.
Did you?
And I drafted the Tennessee Collection Services Act, the initial one. I'm sure it's been amended many times since, but it was passed by the legislature.
Did any of the events such as the Civil Rights Movement or the Vietnam War or the women's movement affect your career?
I don't think it did.
Did you have the opportunity to serve the profession?
Well, yes. I was chairman of the Entertainment and Sports Law section of the Tennessee Bar, and I've done a great deal of pro bono work, still do.
Did you find that rewarding?
Very, very. Not very rewarding monetarily, but
So you made a career out of helping people across
giving
the
back
board.
is what I call it, yeah.
Did your entertainment law practice have an international component?
Yes, it did. I represented Javelin Records, which was a company out of the United Kingdom, and as a result, I would go to the International Music Publishing trade show in Cannes, France, which they called MIDEM, M-I-D-E-M. And my job for Javelin was to review all the titles of the master recordings that they wanted to purchase.
And by title, do you mean the chain of ownership?
The chain of ownership, yes.
How did you do that?
Well, I would try to get as much of the chain of titles that the person who was trying to sell it had and where he got it. By that time, we knew who the counterfeiters were in regard to the various master recordings.
And by that, some people were selling master recordings that they really didn't own? Or
Well, I
trying
would
to?
say that would be a fact, yes.
Did you know John Lamont?
Yes, I did know John Lamont.
Tell us about John Lamont.
John was a music pirate, and he would do all he could to get his hands on material that he didn't necessarily own. On one occasion, he bought a truckload of records from, I believe it was Polygram Records, and it had good and bad records. However, before it got to John, it was hijacked. And somehow only the good records were taken, leaving him with the unhappy collection of bad records.
Now, your entertainment practice took you to France, and it also took you to a number of federal and state courts throughout the country. Is that right?
New York, California, Texas, New Jersey, Tennessee.
Did you teach at Belmont for a while?
I did. I taught entertainment career development for 1 year till I figured out how much they were paying me.
What do you consider to be your most rewarding memories from your career as a lawyer?
Meeting so many of the leaders in the entertainment field, lawyers, record label executives, publishing heads. It was just a very rewarding experience to be in that industry.
And do you look back and see hardships and pitfalls that you considered significant?
Very significant. Coming out of law school with no money and no job and have no choice but to establish a solo practice.
Young lawyers are going to watch this video, and do you have any advice for young lawyers who are starting their careers?
If they're lucky enough to have employment with a firm, or if they settle for a solo practice, don't take anything for granted. Don't complain about having to work long hours, because you will. And always maintain a positive attitude. That's the main thing that you should take away from a law practice.
What do you foresee the future of law firms to be?
I don't see a positive situation with law firms and lawyers. So many lawyers going from firm to firm, staying a couple years and then moving on to greener pastures. Today's lawyers do not believe in the civility that we had back in the 60s and 70s, and it's very difficult to trust a lawyer today unless what he tells you is in writing.
Tell us a little bit about your retirement.
Retirement is wunderbar.
What does that mean?
That means wonderful. I get up in the morning and I can decide then what it is I'm gonna do or not do that day. And when I started retirement, I made myself a project. And that project was to learn how to do nothing. And that's what I do a lot of the times. I will have lunch a couple times a week with my buddies. I may play golf once or twice. But a lot of the times I sit and look out my office window at home and watch the birds, watch the deer come through the backyard, chase away the raccoons. It's great. It is wonderful. It gives me the opportunity to do pro bono work where I would not have had the opportunity before.
Ralph, is there anything else that you wish I'd asked you that you'd like to tell us?
I can't think of anything that you haven't asked.
Thank you for your service to the profession, and congratulations on your distinguished career and your retirement. My final question to you, Ralph, is how you'd like to be remembered.
I would hope that I would be remembered as a conscientious and ethical lawyer. Personally, I hope I'll be remembered as setting a good example for my children and my grandchildren. Thank you.